All right, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another Form Check Friday. It's Friday. This is what we do. And what we do is take your videos that you send us. We put them up on the screen. We try to offer you some technique advice. We talk a little bit about programming. We're basically trying to make powerlifters that little bit better and do something nice for the community. So if you dig it, make sure to like and subscribe, all that good stuff. Let us know in the comments section below. We did launch our throwback collection on Friday, and just wanted to say thank you. Thanks to everybody who picked something up. Y'all went nuts on it. I guess everybody likes the classic gorilla logo, and that was good to see. So thank you all for all of the support. We appreciate you. Now, without any further ado, we're going to start off with Lee, who we left off with last time. Okay, so to give a little bit of quick background on Lee, 37. He's been training for about 10 years. Mostly powerlifting focused, kind of getting back into it since the spring, he mentioned. And he says bench has kind of always been his problem lift, the problem child. Tried a lot of different tips and cues. He says his leg drive, and keeping it going is tough. Sometimes his butt comes up off the bench. So let's watch through this one more time. First thing I notice, please wrap those thumbs around the bar. It's dangerous. It's really dangerous to not have your thumb around the bar. That's just not a good idea. A lot of people have gotten hurt not having their thumb wrapped around the bar. So please, first things, do that. The other big thing I think is going to help you really build your bench and get more consistency with your pressing is every time you unrack, let's pull that bar out a tiny bit more, right? It looks like right now the bar's kind of like way back here, maybe above your like eye to mouth level. And some lifters with longer arms like myself are comfortable even pulling it out a little further. So if you can imagine just grabbing a straight bar on a lat pull down, standing in front of it and just pulling down, depressing your shoulder blades, right? Trying to get your shoulder blades to come down with it, trying to get nice and tight in the lats as you do. That's going to be a really great way out of the rack to try to build additional tightness so that by the time you start the descent, you've got a little bit of more shoulder tightness, shoulder stability, nice tight upper back position, is what we're after. It looks like you're doing a really good job bringing your chest up to the bar. That's always something I advocate a lot. I think with that pulling the bar out a little, we might find a little more comfort with a slightly lower touch. Right now we're pretty flared out. We might be able to tuck a little, touch a tiny bit lower and go from like here to here and trim just that little bit of range of motion off the press. Definitely work on some pauses. I'm not sure what your bench variation setup is like, but 100% I would recommend if you're not doing any paused bench work, pause some benches. It's going to get you more comfortable. It's going to get you stronger off the chest. And, for most raw lifters, that's where we're running into some of the roadblocks in terms of building our bench strength. So if we can spend a little bit more time in like a nice tight isometric contraction with the bar paused on the chest, that's going to help a lot. The other thing that I would recommend when it comes to leg drive is essentially what you're trying to do is you're trying to push yourself back this way up the bench, right? Like you're trying to imagine you're on a rolly chair and you're trying to extend out this way to push yourself away from your desk, right? Basically, all we're trying to do is push back this way. If you find your butt coming up off the bench, a lot of the times, if we're not actively squeezing the glutes and keeping the hip extended, we're like down like this in the arch with the hips back here. Then when we go to apply leg drive, sometimes only on the way up, then we push, the hips lift. But if we keep nearly 100% pressure and 100% contraction and extension in the hip, then we should be able to kind of just like almost float the butt while keeping it in contact and not get that much movement out of it. The other big things with leg drive are going to be your foot placement. So we might be a little more comfortable wider or further out. I'm drawing behind myself, but out this way or further pulled back. You can play around with your toe angle, toe out a little, toe in a little. You can try to, some lifters like to think about almost like squeezing the bench with their knees. There's a lot of different ways to do the thing. So, play around with some of those suggestions, see if you can find a little bit of a better way. But I think the biggest thing right off the hop that I notice is we're not pulling the bar all the way out. We're benching from like way back, almost behind your head, which is going to result in an unnecessarily long range of motion. So I hope that helps, Lay. sorry. But yeah, best of luck. All right. Our next lifter here is, hold on. Wait, what the? I got to check this out. What the hell is that? Well, that was something else. Sorry for the interruption there. It's always a wild ride here at HQ, but getting on to the next lifter, we're talking about James here. James is doing some deadlifts, and let's take a look. All right, now for James's deadlifts, he says he's coming back from a bit of a break. Let's get the crop right on this. There we go. Coming back from a bit of a break, going for some rep PRs in his current program, and feeling like his second rep here looked too stiff-legged. He figures his setup and his leg drive could use some work, and basically wants to know what we think of it all. So I definitely think we're pretty high-hipped here, James. I think, you know, we're definitely setting up with a really high hip angle, and I think probably sitting a little lower, allowing the knees a little bit more forward is going to get you a little more of that leg drive, a little more tightness and consistency off the floor. So I definitely recommend it. The other thing that I'm going to recommend is, because it looks like you're a pretty tall guy, I'm gonna recommend we widen things out a little bit. I think that if you sit down right now, we're going to get a little crowded between quads and the torso. It's going to be a little awkward, but I think if we widen the grip just a tiny bit, that's going to allow us to move our feet, our stance out a tiny bit. It's going to allow us to move our legs out a tiny bit. And then we're going to get a little bit better extension, a little more neutral spine position, a little more neutral back position as we sit down, and allow those knees forward. It's going to get a little bit more upright in the trunk. And I think that's probably what I would recommend. Now, the other thing is going to be to learn to essentially pull the slack out of the bar. So the biggest, or sorry, the best way I can describe pulling the slack out of the bar is that essentially before you bring your hips down into position, you start pushing the floor away, right? So first things first, I like to set up with my hips very intentionally high, like very stiff-legged to start with. Find that tension in the hips and hamstrings. Then start pushing the floor away as you bring your hips down. Like you're actively resisting, allowing yourself to pull the hips down. And it sounds weird, sounds like it doesn't make any sense, but you're gonna push down on the floor with your legs like you're doing a leg press as you pull your hips down into position. And then once we get good position through the lower body, right? So this will cover, you know, finding tension in the hips and the hamstrings and the quads. Once we find that nice hip angle, essentially what we want to do next is tighten the back and the trunk, right? So we're going to brace out into the belt, all directions as much as we can. Take a nice big breath into there, and then try to pull your lats down into your butt. Basically try to pull your shoulder blades down into your belt, if you will. And from that point, I think we're going to have a little bit better success with a consistent start position. You know, you got to make yourself a little process or checklist that you go through each and every time you lift, so that you can ensure that we're doing the same lift each and every time we lift. You know, I think that's one of the big things that more intermediate lifters need to work on as they go from beginner to intermediate. And one of the things that helps intermediate lifters become advanced lifters is going to be having that consistency in their technique, having that consistency and a little less variation, you know, a little less chance to misgroove something, if you will. So that's my take on that, and I hope it helps you out. Next, we have Pierce doing some squats here. Let's take a look at Pierce's squats. So Pierce said this is around a 9.5 RPE, but he went up 10 pounds and got it after this. Now he said he's feeling the bar wanting to slip off of his back. He says even with a squat bar, stopped a little bit higher because he was worried about butt wink. So I think he's talking about depth there, right? Currently squatting 2 times a week, thinking about maybe going to 3 times a week, and wondering if I have any tips on form or programming. So first things first, if the bar feels like it's sliding off your back, we need to work on the shelf. Now you mentioned maybe doing some extra rear delt work to try to build a little more of a shelf to have some more meat for it to sit on. Not a bad idea. Never a bad idea to have a little bit more muscle, right? The big thing I'm seeing here is number one, when we're setting up, I think our grip's a little narrow. I think we could grip a little wider and more actively kind of like retract those shoulder blades, try to just bunch up all the muscles here to give it a little bit more shelf to sit on. It's not necessarily always about having more muscle in the upper back. A lot of the times it's about, you know, contracting it in a way that makes it protrude to create that shelf, right? The other thing you can do is play around with that bar position a little higher or a little lower. In a lot of cases, if the bar isn't sturdy, we just need to put it in a very slightly different place, right? There's a lot of misconceptions, I think, about bar position, high bar versus low bar versus mid bar versus mid-high bar, like whatever. More important that we find a position where it feels relatively comfortable, and most importantly, where it's stable. Now, the next thing, if we're having issues with the back feeling sturdy on our back, we probably don't want to unrack like this. We probably don't want to like try to toss the bar off our back when we unrack. That, I think, is going to contribute a lot to the instability and the inconsistency of that upper back position. So stand it up like you're already in a squat. You don't have to use more force than you need to. But the idea is that when we're setting up, we glue the bar into our back. And when we unrack and walk out, we keep that bar glued into the back. So the walkout, I think we could maybe try to tone down the number of steps there, try to, keep it a little more controlled in that sense. The other thing that I'm going to point out with the squat is we're looking really far down. Now, I don't think that people need to look up, and I don't think that looking down is a bad thing, but I would recommend, changing your gaze maybe from here to like the top of this line there, the top of this line between these two materials. Looking up just slightly, I think is going to also help you keep your upper back in a bit of a better position. Because I think one of the reasons it feels like it's falling is because as soon as we start descending, we're kind of curled over in the upper back. And then we change our head position throughout, right? We're reaching back up with the head on the way up. Looks like you contemplated going for another rep there. Also looks like it might be a little bit high. So you mentioned, running into some butt wink when you went a little deeper. Now, the big thing with this, sort of butt wink concept is that I think a lot of people look at it and they see any movement in the low back or pelvis and they're like, oh my God, it's butt wink. I'm gonna blow my spine apart. Not often the case, not actually the case at all. The thing with, the low back and pelvis is that almost everybody, when they get to good comp depth, is going to have a little bit of movement in there. And again, as long as you're loading your body appropriately and training it appropriately, not progressing with, reckless abandon or anything like that, your body's going to adapt to that slight little bit of movement. Now, if you're getting a huge amount of change in the, extension versus flexion of your lower back, and it's really disrupting the lift, then that's probably a bigger thing. And honestly, probably the solution is just to pull the weight back, work on your bracing a little bit, and try to get things, a little bit more consistent into the bottom. You can look at things like stance width for that, and more specifically, like I said, bracing, right? So we're thinking about pulling the ribs down on top of the abs. We're trying to think about maintaining a nice neutral back position, and we're most definitely trying to fill that torso out into the belt with a nice big breath. So those are the things I'd be considerate of. It looks like we're getting pretty far on the toes here as we get into the bottom as well. So, there's a couple different things we can work on. These shoes might not be the best. They look like some skate shoes or something like that. Probably worth it to either go for a heeled squat shoe or just something more minimal that's not going to compress underneath you. Try to keep some weight on those heels throughout the squat, right? We can see it pop up on the toes there. Very common thing with people trying not to go too deep or trying not to lose their bracing. Something you'll probably have to overcome if we want to learn to squat deeper and better. So, all right. I hope that helps, Pierce. Best of luck with squats. Up next here is Darren. So Darren spent 6 months in the gym and is about 3 weeks into a powerlifting program. So this is a working set of 127.5 kilos for a set of 5. And Darren mentioned he's getting some mid-lower back soreness. Wondering if that's normal or if that has something to do with his technique. Now, he also mentioned that he's aware there's a little bit of back rounding in his deadlift, but he's not sure if that's something he should be concerned about, if that's an issue. He's heard likely myself and a lot of other people say that the back rounding in and of itself, not inherently injurious, not inherently going to hurt you because it's not gonna. He also mentioned he's been finding himself using straps for weights that are close to his 1RM and wants to know if we have any advice for building grip strength on the deadlift. Now, as per usual, we're gonna let this one fly. we're going to leave it up to the commenters in the comment section below. Go ahead and give your best advice down there for Darren. And I'm going to start next week's Form Check Friday with my advice for Darren. So thanks to everybody for tuning in. Make sure to hit the like and subscribe button. Leave a comment below, and we'll see you next week for Form Check Friday. Bye-bye, everybody.